Okay, hello everyone. My name's Ethan, and today I'm going to be presenting the Battle of Leyte Gulf, which takes place in October of 1944 in the Pacific Theater in World War II between United States Naval Forces and the Japanese Imperial Navy. So let's get right on into this. So let's look at what led up to Leyte in particular. So in June of 1944, we had the invasion of the Mariana Islands, the invasion of the islands Saipan, Guam, Tinian, that would extend into July of 1944. A significant date is June 19th, which is the day of the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, which was known as the Battle of the Philippine Sea, where over 300 Japanese planes were shot down by American forces. It's the last real offensive made by the Japanese. After that, they would no longer be able to really launch a full carrier offensive, big air attacks like they did earlier in 1942. So going into August, Japanese are pushed out of Burma, and as China kind of squeezes them down and out on the continental Asian area, and the Marianas are completely captured, which opens up bomber bases to bomb Iwo Jima and Okinawa. So this is the Americans are really tightening down on the Japanese at this point in the war. So why Leyte? Well, if we look at the Indonesian islands and the Philippines here, so Indonesia is the home of all the oil reserves for the Japanese. And if the Americans could cut off the Japanese from their oil supplies, it would end the war that much quicker. And MacArthur said that he would come back to save. He said, "I shall return to the Philippines to liberate the Philippine people from the Japanese." So on October 20th, 1944, the initial invasion of 6th Army took place, which was brought in by Kinkaid's 7th Fleet. So the real naval battle of Guadalcanal takes place in 4 main segments. So we have the Battle of the Sibuyan Sea right in here. Number 2, down here is the Battle of Surigao Strait. Number 3 is the Battle off Cape Engano. And then we have the Battle off Samar, number 4 down here. So there are several key components to the offensive from the Japanese, this being the real last offensive push by the Japanese in the war, really. So we have the Northern Force, which is under the command of Jizaburo Ozawa, who is a carrier mastermind and knows what he's doing, but unfortunately at this point in the war, the Japanese don't have the means or capabilities of launching such large-scale attacks like they used to, like during the Guadalcanal campaign, for example. This ship here is the Zuikaku, the sole remaining ship of the Pearl Harbor carrier strike force. Now we're going to look at the planes that the Japanese have, that they have on their carriers at least. So up here at the top, this green aircraft is known as the Kate torpedo bomber by the Americans. Three-man crew, and it's a torpedo bomber for sinking ships, obviously. In the middle here we have the infamous Japanese Zero, the fighter aircraft, the menacing fighter aircraft of the Japanese Navy. This aircraft was predominantly more successful in the beginning of the war with its more experienced pilots, but as America shot down a lot of its more experienced pilots at Midway, Guadalcanal, the Japanese Navy is nowhere near what it used to be in terms of their pilots. And then we have the Val dive bomber down here, responsible for a lot of American deaths between all of these aircraft, but these are the main carrier aircraft that the Japanese have at this time. Now we have the Southern Force, which is under the command of Sojo Nishimura. Here we have the two dreadnought battleships, Fuso-class battleships. We have the Fuso and the Yamashiro. These battleships are the main opposing weapons that Yamashiro will use with his southern force. But the real power drive of this force is the Central Force, which is under the command of Takeo Kurita. Kurita has the possession of these two wonderful vessels here, the Yamato and the Musashi, the two largest battleships ever built in the world, in the hands of the Japanese Navy. So, taking a look at the Yamato-class battleship, 72,000 tons when fully loaded, 863 feet long, 172-foot beam, with a max speed of 27 knots. So this ship, being massive in size, had a pretty impressive top speed. Main battery of 9 18.1-inch guns, the largest guns ever used on a naval ship. 6.1-inch guns located in these two turrets, and these are the 18.1-inch guns. 24 5-inch guns, which are located across the superstructure of the ship, and 138 25mm anti-aircraft guns, plus another of other machine guns. But this was the cream of the crop, as you may say, of the Japanese Navy at this time. Their carrier force was nothing what it used to be, so the Japanese have to rely on their surface vessels if they want to succeed in defeating the Americans at Leyte. Now we're going to look at the American fleets at the time. We have 3rd Fleet, which is under the command of Admiral Bull Halsey. 3rd Fleet here is comprised of 8 full-size fleet carriers, including the legendary USS Enterprise, along with these number of Essex carriers. Halsey as the carrier force. And then we have carrier aircraft at the time. So we have the F-6F Hellcat, SBD dive bomber in the middle here. And then down at the bottom, TBF Avenger, which is the torpedo bomber, but is a multi-purpose bomber, unlike the Kate torpedo plane that the Japanese had. So these are the Hellcat and the SBD dive bomber are currently being phased out at this time to make room for the SB-2C Helldiver that we see here on the top and the F-4U Corsair, which were the new aircraft coming into the Navy at this time. Then we're going to look at 7th Fleet, which is under the command of Thomas Kincaid. The New Hampshire man is leading the invasion force and responsible for the actual landings at Leyte Gulf. And we have a subgroup of 7th Fleet, which is Task Force 77.2, under the command of Jesse Oldendorf. These battleships here are older battleships. We have the USS Wyoming. The USS West Virginia, my bad. And the USS California here. These ships have been sunk at Pearl Harbor, but raised and refurbished and modernized, in particular for shore bombardment, but they would end up playing a much more important role in this battle, as we will see. Then we have Taffy 3, which is under the command of Clifton Sprague, which is comprised of escort carriers and destroyers. This force is also another pivotal grouping of ships that will play out in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Okay, so we're going to start with the Battle of the Sibuyan Sea, which is the first battle that takes place during, or I should say sub-battle that takes place during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Here we have a painting rendition of the Battle of Leyte Gulf, TBF Avengers bombing the Musashi, and over here is a picture of the Yamato taking a bomb hit during the Battle of the Sibuyan Sea. So the Battle of the Sibuyan Sea is obviously within the Sibuyan Sea, in between like the main islands of Luzon and Leyte down over here. This is Samar. So the Central Force is going to end up coming through here and getting intercepted by Halsey's aircraft. The Musashi, which is one of the 2 super battleships that Japan has, took a massive beating in this and ended up sinking. But the amazing thing about this ship is the extent of the damage that this ship actually took before she finally went beneath the waves. So in total, the Americans hit her with 19 torpedoes and 17 bombs before she actually rolled over and sank, which is impressive. 6 waves of carrier aircraft until that took place. The Americans did not expect at all for the ship to take that much punishment, which made the Americans kind of wary when it came to the other ship, the Yamato, which they did not hit nearly as hard. They focused their damage on the Musashi. So also in the battle, the carrier aircraft from Halsey's Third Fleet managed to sink the Maya, the Agato, and the Taco, but the Taco would end up being scuttled later on at the end of the battle, and we have the organization of the ships here, and then obviously the Musashi would also be sunk. This picture was taken as they were leaving Indonesia for the charge against the Japanese, or I mean the Americans at Leyte. Here is a picture. What ends up happening is that the Japanese managed to launch a carrier aircraft attack, but most of the planes are easily gunned down except for one that managed to get through and hit the USS Princeton, a light aircraft carrier, which draws the attention of Halsey to realizing that there's a carrier force involved. Planes came from the north, so assuming or hearing about this enemy carrier fleet, his decision is either to head north, sink the Japanese carriers, and he can only assume that the Zuikaku is there, the sole remaining ship of the Pearl Harbor fleet, and he's been wanting to sink this ship for some time now, or stay and support the Leyte invasion. So if we look back here, Halsey's Third Fleet is spread out along the Philippines here, and after the Musashi is sunk, the Japanese are appearing to be retreating. Kurita's force appears to be retreating back for the Indonesian islands. So he thinks that it will be okay if he pulls out and heads north to take out the carrier force, thinking the carrier force is the main threat. But as we know, the Japanese carrier force is nowhere near the main threat. They don't have the same experience that the Americans have, and they have far too little planes to launch a real attack, and what they did launch was kind of a fluke. So in the eyes of Halsey at this time, he thinks it's fine to move out, and that's what he does. He ends up pulling all of the ships out and heading north, leaving Kinkaid alone. Next is the Battle of Surigao Strait, which involves Oldendorf's old battleships and Nimishuro's forces. So here's another picture of these 2 Fuso-class battleships I talked about earlier, the Yamashiro and the Fuso. Now, if we look at the Fuso-class battleship, these were initially built in 1913, so these are Dreadnought-era battleships, and had several modernization periods to make them more current to the time. So at a displacement of 34,000 tons, they were 690 feet long, 100 feet wide, at a max speed of 24 knots, which is not too bad for a dreadnought battleship. They each had 12 14-inch guns, 14 6-inch guns, 8 5-inch guns, and 96 anti-aircraft guns. So the Fuso and the Yamashiro are formidable enemies against any ship. Well, here's the deal. So we got the California and the West Virginia. These American ships had undergone a modernization after being raised out of Pearl Harbor. So they now have new radar-controlled main battery of 16-inch guns, which obviously outguns the 14-inch guns. Granted, they have more of them, but Oldendorf has more battleships and a lot more 16-inch guns at the end of the day. So and they're far more accurate with their new radar-guided systems. They also have new 5-inch guns, 40mm Bofor cannons. So these ships are no joke for them being somewhat outdated vessels. So here we're going to look here at the actual battle map here. So we have Leyte and Dingat Island here. And Oldendorf's going to do a classic maneuver here of crossing the T. So all of his ships are going to be facing broadside on to the column of Nimashura's ships. And as you can see, we got the battle line here of the battleships, the West Virginia and the California, which we looked at earlier. So these two lines peeling back are actually the two lead ships, which are Yamashiro and Fuso. Both ships end up getting sunk in the battle, taking the full broadside of 6 battleships. So Yamashiro gets hit, and Fuso gets hit. Yamashiro pulls off to the left here, also being Nimashura's flagship, and Nimashura is killed in the battle and goes down with Yamashiro, and the Fuso goes down as well. And then the rest of his force ends up retreating, since both of the 2 battleships that they had, the rest that they had were heavy cruisers. Another 2 heavy cruisers were also sunk in the battle. Now we have the Battle off Samar and the Battle of Cape Engano, the last 2 battles. These took place at the same time, really. But Halsey was too far north dealing with the carriers, as we'll see, but we're going to take a look at the Battle off Samar first. So this happens in the midday of October 25th. So here we're looking at a picture from a TBF Avenger aircraft from one of the escort carriers. This is Ensign Bill Brooks taking the picture from his torpedo bomber, and he's reporting in, hey, I'm looking at the Yamato, and some other heavy cruiser in the back there. But hey, Kurita's force is right upon us. And, excuse me, this takes everyone completely off guard. And here we are with Taffy 3. So this ship here is the USS Johnston, a destroyer with the largest caliber gun being a 5-inch gun. And it's under the command of Ernest E. Evans, who boldly decides to take on the Japanese Armada, take on the Yamato's 18.1-inch guns. So we got Taffy 3 here, who ends up laying smoke screens, and the escort carriers are going to try to get up as many aircraft as possible to try to harass the Japanese to get them to turn around and retreat, because Taffy 3 is the only thing that stands in the way of them interfering with the landing operations. And when you have Yamato and Congo and other battleships accompanying you, you're going to lead to some serious issues. So the main thing that Evans and the other commanders decide to do is to use their torpedoes, because destroyers have torpedoes and they want to use those against the fleet. But the thing is that they have to get within 5 miles of the ships, and all those ships have much greater range than 5 miles, so they have to dodge and weave enemy fire to lay torpedoes into these enemy vessels. So the first ship that's actually hit is the heavy cruiser Kumano. They actually blow the bow right off of it with torpedoes. So it ends up having to pull out rather quickly. And they end up staying right alongside the Japanese Kurita's Central Force. And with the smoke screens, it's not really clear how much the Japanese, what kind of force they're dealing with here. Little do they know, they're only going up against a bunch of destroyers and escort carriers. So, obviously, there are going to be some casualties, including the USS Johnston and Ernest E. Evans. They go down in the battle. Over here is the escort carrier USS St. Lo, which is hit by the Yamato here, and as you can see, some significant damage. The St. Lo ends up going down. We have the USS Hull, which is this destroyer right here, and a destroyer escort Up here, the USS Samuel Roberts. Battle of Cape Engano, which is happening roughly at the same time of the Battle of Samar, but significantly more north off the coast of Luzon. So here are the 5 carriers that the Americans have already claimed that launched the Pearl Harbor attack. We have the Akagi, the Kaga, the Soryu, the Hiryu, and Shokaku. The first 4 were sunk at Midway. These were the main opposing carriers at Midway, all sunk by the Americans. And the Shokaku was actually sunk in June during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. So these were sunk in 1942. This one was sunk in 1944. Leaving the last Japanese carrier, the Zuikaku. So this, like I said, happens off the coast of Luzon, Cape Engano. And there's a funny thing is that the Americans were fooled by the Japanese Northern Force to pull their carriers out of Leyte. And engaño means in Spanish deceit and or delusion, which is really funny because the Americans fell for the deceit by the Japanese. Okay, so this picture here is as an aerial view, obviously. This ship down to the left here is the Zuikaku, and as you can see, clearly on fire. And then over here we have the light carrier Zuiho, which is also hit. So the Zuiho burning in this image here. Battleship Issei, which was an accompanying ship. It was a Congo-class battleship that was converted into a half aircraft carrier. This back portion here is a flight deck, and it managed to carry 23 planes, but yet still have 4 14-inch guns. Then over here, 8 14-inch guns, my bad. This over here is a picture taken off the flight deck of the Zuikaku as the Zuikaku was hit hard by American torpedoes and was beginning to sink, and the entire crew shaking swords and cussing off the Americans. So, nonetheless, Pearl Harbor has finally been avenged at the sinking of the Zuikaku. Now we're going to take a look at the losses of both sides. As you can see, the United States, we took a few damages, but the Japanese really were the ones that took the beating. They were the one that launched the real offensive, really, to try to counter the American landings at Leyte. But they lost their last fleet carrier, the Zuikaku. They lost 3 light carriers that were also there, so they have no more aircraft carriers. They lost 3 battleships, including the Musashi, the Yamashiro, and the Fuso. Both those battleships in the Southern Force. 6 heavy cruisers, and there's also the Myoko, which ends up being scuttled, as well as the Kumano, the light cruisers, and 9 destroyers. So the Americans clearly won the battle, and if we look at casualties, the Americans lost 3,000 naval officers and men, including around 100 aircraft, and the Japanese lost 12,500 roughly among their naval and air forces. Both of these totals are not including the Army totals on the ground. These are strictly naval and aerial. And the Japanese lost roughly 300 aircraft as well. The last of their naval aircraft are done. And General MacArthur has returned. And so he's made it back to the Philippines, which is an important Leyte landings are a success. And after this point in the war, this is when the dreaded Kamikaze Attacks began going into full effect to prevent the Americans from continuing their campaign up into Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Well, thank you for tuning in and watching this presentation of mine. This was a fun one. This is personally one of my favorite battles in World War II, if not my favorite battle of World War II. So here's me a very young third grade Ethan on the deck of the USS Massachusetts. So that's that.